In the rural Ohio winter of 1834, at the Sacred Heart Convent, 12 nuns died within 48 hours of each other. Signs of illness, injury, or distress were shown by not a single one. The youngest was 23. The oldest, 47. In their beds, all were found, hands folded in prayer, their expressions peaceful as if from this world they had simply chosen to slip away. Each body was examined by the local physician, Dr. Samuel Hartwell, who declared them all to have been in perfect health at the time of death. No poison was found, no violence detected, no disease present. For nearly 2 centuries, what really happened at Sacred Heart has been kept sealed away in their archives by the Catholic Church. But a truth far more disturbing than any supernatural explanation could ever be is now revealed by recently discovered letters and testimonies from that terrible winter. Before the story of Sacred Heart Convent continues, let it be known that this channel isn't for everyone, but only for the bravest souls who dare to uncover the dark secrets that history tried to bury. If you possess the courage to hear the truth about what really happened in that isolated convent, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. The stories we tell here are dared by few channels to tell. And if you've made it this far, clearly you're not like most people. Now, let's discover together what drove 12 healthy women to their deaths in the span of 2 winter days. For generations, the events at Sacred Heart would remain hidden, but the truth always has a way of surfacing, especially when it's written in the trembling hand of someone who lived through the horror. On 47 acres of rolling farmland in southeastern Ohio, approximately 12 miles from the small town of Millbrook, sat the Sacred Heart Convent. Established in 1821 by the Sisters of Mercy, the convent had been built to serve the growing Catholic population of German and Irish immigrants who had settled in the region following the completion of the Ohio and Erie Canal. As a beacon of faith in a predominantly Protestant area, the 2-story brick building stood with its distinctive bell tower and iron crosses, an area where Catholic settlers often faced suspicion and sometimes open hostility. Since 1828, Mother Superior Catherine Brennan had overseen the convent, ruling with a firm but loving hand over the 17 nuns who called Sacred Heart home. Through farming, teaching at the small school they operated for local Catholic children, and needlework they sold to families in Millbrook and the surrounding farms, the sisters supported themselves. By all accounts, they lived quietly, devoutly, and without causing any trouble for their Protestant neighbors. Particularly harsh had been the winter of 1834. Steadily since November, snow had fallen, and by January drifts reached nearly to the first-floor windows of the convent. Well for the cold months had the sisters prepared, with their root cellar stocked with preserved vegetables, their pantry filled with grain, and their woodshed packed with split oak and maple. Difficult winters they had weathered before, and this one seemed no different from the others. As the convent's recorder, Sister Mary Agnes, 26 years old and originally from County Cork, Ireland, served, keeping detailed logs of daily activities, weather conditions, and the spiritual progress of the community. The only first-hand account of what transpired during those final days is provided by her meticulous records, discovered in a sealed wooden box beneath the convent's floorboards during renovations in 1923. As the entries progress, her handwriting, normally neat and precise, becomes increasingly erratic, with the final pages showing clear signs of distress, trembling letters, crossed-out words, and what appears to be tear stains on the paper. For their particular devotion and unique roles within the community, several sisters at Sacred Heart stood out. The youngest at 23, Sister Mary Catherine, had joined the convent only 2 years earlier after her entire family died in a cholera outbreak in Cincinnati. Her beautiful singing voice was well known, echoing through the halls during evening prayers. The convent's herbalist and healer was Sister Mary Elizabeth, at 34, having learned the medicinal properties of plants from her grandmother in Bavaria. With shrewd intelligence that had helped them survive the economic difficulties of the early 1830s, Sister Mary Margaret, 41, managed their modest finances as the convent's treasurer. The strict routine of canonical hours was followed by the convent, with the sisters rising at 4 o'clock in the morning for matins and prime, followed by Mass at sunrise. With simple porridge and bread, they broke their fast, then attended to their various duties, teaching, farming, cooking, cleaning, and prayer. At noon, dinner was served, followed by more work and study. At sunset, vespers took place, and at 8 o'clock in the evening, Carmine marked the beginning of the great silence that lasted until morning prayers. The practical needs of a religious community were reflected in the building itself. The chapel, refectory, kitchen, and Mother Superior's office were contained on the first floor. The dormitory-style cells where the sisters slept were housed on the second floor, each containing only a narrow bed, a small wooden crucifix, and a basin for washing. The root cellar, laundry area, and a small library where the sisters could study religious texts and conduct their correspondence were held in the basement. Its isolation made Sacred Heart unique among convents of its time. 3 miles away lived the nearest neighbor, and during heavy snows, the road to Millbrook became impassable. This isolation, which the sisters had always viewed as a blessing that allowed them to focus entirely on their spiritual duties, would prove to be a crucial factor in the tragedy that was about to unfold. On the morning of January 15, 1834, came the first sign that something was amiss. In her daily record, Sister Mary Agnes noted that Sister Mary Catherine had not appeared for matins, an unprecedented occurrence for the young nun known for her punctuality and devotion. Lying peacefully in her bed was how Mother Superior Brennan found Sister Mary Catherine when she went to check on her, her rosary still clutched in her hands, her lips curved in what appeared to be a gentle smile. Through the snowdrifts, Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the Protestant physician from Millbrook, made the treacherous journey to examine the body. A man of science and skeptical of Catholic practices, Dr. Hartwell nonetheless took his oath seriously and conducted a thorough examination. His findings are detailed with clinical precision in his report, preserved in the Millbrook Township records. No signs of violence, poisoning, or disease are shown by the deceased. Healthy is her complexion, no rigidity beyond what is normal for recent death is shown by her limbs, and clear are her eyes. Through physical examination, I can detect no cause of death. What he didn't find disturbed Dr. Hartwell most, not what he found. In perfect health at the time of her death, Sister Mary Catherine appeared to be. Her heart was strong, her lungs clear, her blood showed no signs of illness. About her behavior in the days preceding her death, when he questioned the other sisters, they could only say that she had seemed more peaceful than usual, spending extra time in prayer and speaking often of feeling blessed and chosen. 2 days later, on January 17, the funeral was held, with the entire convent community present. From his parish in Lancaster, Father Timothy O'Brien, the circuit priest who visited Sacred Heart monthly, had been summoned to perform the last rites. Steadily the snow had continued to fall, and blanketed in white was the cemetery behind the convent, with only the iron crosses marking the graves of previous sisters visible above the drifts. That the funeral proceeded normally was recorded by Sister Mary Agnes, with the sisters singing hymns and offering prayers for their departed sister's soul. But she also noted something that would prove to be prophetic. On how peaceful Sister Mary Catherine looked, several of the sisters commented how she seemed to be smiling even in death. The peace she had found was what Sister Mary Elizabeth said she envied. That she too had been having dreams of angels calling her home was mentioned by Sister Mary Margaret. The next morning, January 18, for matins, Sister Mary Elizabeth did not appear. Now deeply concerned, Mother Superior Brennan discovered the herbalist sister in her bed, lying in exactly the same position as Sister Mary Catherine had been found, hands folded, rosary clutched, that same inexplicable smile on her lips. With a dread she could not explain, the sight filled the Mother Superior. This was no coincidence, no natural death. Something was terribly wrong at Sacred Heart Convent. Through the snow, Dr. Hartwell returned, his horse struggling against the drifts that had grown even deeper overnight. The same impossible results were yielded by his second examination. Like her predecessor, Sister Mary Elizabeth showed no signs of illness or injury. For potential poisons, her supplies of medicinal herbs were examined, but nothing was found. A growing frustration is shown by the doctor's notes from this visit. I am baffled by these deaths. Both women appear to have simply stopped living as if they had chosen to depart this world of their own volition. In the chapel that evening for an emergency prayer session, the remaining sisters gathered. The recitation of the rosary was led by Mother Superior Brennan. But Sister Mary Agnes noted that the familiar words seemed to hang heavy in the air, as if the very atmosphere of the convent had changed. There is something in the air here, she wrote, something that makes the hair on one's arms stand up. The other sisters feel it, too, though none speak of it aloud. We pray harder, but our prayers seem to echo back to us unanswered. Through the isolated convent community, ripples of unease were sent by the deaths of Sisters Mary Catherine and Mary Elizabeth. Additional prayer sessions and fasting were imposed by Mother Superior Brennan, believing that perhaps God was testing their faith. With renewed fervor, the remaining 15 sisters threw themselves into their devotions. But a change in their behavior that chilled her to the bone was noted by Sister Mary Agnes. The sisters speak more of death than of life, she wrote in her record book. They discuss the peace that our departed sisters have found, and some express envy at their release from worldly suffering. Staring out the window at the cemetery for hours has been taken to by Sister Mary Margaret, and when asked what she sees there, she simply smiles and says, "Home." A source of mounting tension now became the isolation of the convent, which had once been a blessing. With the roads impossible and no way to communicate with the outside world, the sisters were trapped with their fears and their dead. To Millbrook, Dr. Hartwell had managed to return before the latest snowfall, but he had left behind more questions than answers. In a letter he wrote to his brother, his final words to Mother Superior Brennan were recorded. "I have never encountered anything like this in my 20 years of practice. These women are dying for no reason that medical science can explain." The convent's routine continued, but everything felt different. At for matins, the sisters still rose, but their voices seemed quieter, more distant. Their daily tasks they still attended to, but their movements were mechanical, as if they were sleepwalking through their lives. Most disturbing of all, they began to speak of death not as something to be feared, but as something to be welcomed. With growing alarm, conversations that filled her were recorded by Sister Mary Agnes. A vision she was having during prayer had begun to speak Sister Mary Magdalene, 39 years old and normally the most cheerful of the sisters. She says she sees our departed sisters in fields of golden light, and they are beckoning to her, Agnes wrote. When I ask her to describe these visions more clearly, she becomes vague and says only that they are too beautiful for words. The weather continued to worsen, with temperatures dropping to levels that made it dangerous to venture outside for any length of time. Effectively prisoners in their own convent were the sisters, surrounded by snow and silence. The only sounds were the wind howling around the building and the occasional crack of ice-laden tree branches breaking under the weight of the accumulated snow. Order and normalcy were attempted to be maintained by Mother Superior Brennan, but even she seemed affected by the strange atmosphere that had settled over Sacred Heart. That the Mother Superior had begun to speak of God's will more frequently was noted by Sister Mary Agnes, and that she had started to question whether the deaths were not tragedies but blessings. She said to me yesterday that perhaps our sisters were chosen for a special purpose, that their deaths were not endings but transformations, Agnes wrote. When I asked her what she meant, she looked at me with eyes that seemed to see things I could not and said, "Some souls are too pure for this world, child. Perhaps God is calling them home." From an unexpected source came the first hint that something more than grief was affecting the convent. Mrs. Elizabeth Hoffman, a German immigrant who lived on the nearest farm, had noticed that for several nights, the bell tower of Sacred Heart had been dark. For evening prayers, normally the sisters would ring the bell, and across the snow-covered landscape, the sound would carry. But for 3 nights running, there had been only silence. To check on the sisters, Mrs. Hoffman's husband, Hans, had attempted, but the snow was too deep for his horse to make the journey. Frustrated and concerned, he had returned home, telling his wife that from the convent's chimneys, he had seen no smoke, no signs of life at all. "It's as if the place is holding its breath," he told her, not knowing how prophetic his words would prove to be. On the morning of January 21st, for days after the first death, in the same peaceful state that had claimed her predecessors, Sister Mary Margaret was discovered. The convent's treasurer, known for her sharp mind and practical nature, had apparently chosen to join her departed sisters in whatever realm they had found. Neatly arranged on her small desk were her account books, with all financial records up to date and a note in her precise handwriting, all earthly debts settled. The final accounting awaits. Through the increasingly dangerous weather, Dr. Hartwell, summoned once again, arrived to find the remaining sisters gathered in the chapel. There were now 14 of them, and he was struck by the change in their appearance. Where once he had seen healthy, robust women going about their daily tasks with purpose and energy, he now observed pale, ethereal figures who seemed to be fading before his eyes. Their behavior has become increasingly strange, he wrote in his medical journal. They speak in whispers, smile at things I cannot see, and seem to be listening to voices that no one else can hear. When I ask them direct questions about their health, they respond with vague answers about feeling blessed and chosen. Most disturbing of all, they seem to welcome the deaths of their sisters as if they were celebrations rather than tragedies. The same impossible results were revealed by the doctor's examination of Sister Mary Margaret. A healthy woman had simply stopped living with no medical explanation for her death. Her rosary was clutched in her hands, and her expression was one of such peace that it seemed almost unnatural. That her skin was still warm to the touch, despite having been dead for several hours, was noted by Dr. Hartwell, and that her body showed none of the usual signs of rigor mortis. With increasing urgency, the growing strangeness was documented by Sister Mary Agnes, still maintaining her role as the convent's recorder. Her handwriting, normally neat and controlled, had become erratic, with letters that seemed to tremble on the page. The sisters no longer speak of worldly things, she wrote. Their conversations are all of heaven, of peace, of the joy that awaits beyond this life. They look at me with pity, as if I am the one who is suffering, as if I am the one who is lost. Total had become the isolation of the convent. The snow continued to fall, and the temperature had dropped so low that the water in the kitchen buckets froze solid each night. At an alarming rate, the sisters were burning through their wood supply. But they seemed unconcerned about the practical necessities of survival. Their focus had turned entirely inward towards something that only they could see or understand. On the evening of January 22nd, a special prayer session was called for by Mother Superior Brennan. In the chapel, the remaining sisters gathered, their voices raised in hymns that seemed to echo differently in the cold air. That the singing had taken on an otherworldly quality was noted by Sister Mary Agnes, as if the voices were coming from somewhere beyond the physical realm. I find myself afraid to listen too closely, she wrote. There is something in their voices that calls to me, that makes me want to join them in whatever place they are going. The discovery that would shatter any remaining illusions about the natural causes of the deaths was brought by the next morning. In her bed was found Sister Mary Magdalene, the cheerful sister who had spoken of visions, with that same peaceful expression. But this time there was something different. Along with her rosary, clutched in her hand was a piece of paper with a single word written on it, soon. By now deeply disturbed by the pattern of deaths, Dr. Hartwell insisted on examining not just the latest victim, but the entire convent. What he found in the basement of Sacred Heart would haunt him for the rest of his life. Behind a false wall in the root cellar, he discovered a small chamber that appeared to have been used for purposes unknown to the Catholic Church's approved practices. 13 wooden crosses were contained in the chamber, each bearing the name of a sister. Lying flat on a stone altar were 3 of the crosses, those bearing the names of Mary Catherine, Mary Elizabeth, and Mary Margaret. Upright stood the remaining 10 crosses. But most disturbing of all, they were arranged in a circle around a larger cross bearing the name of Mother Superior Catherine Brennan. Something that defies explanation I have discovered, Dr. Hartwell wrote in his journal. The sisters have been preparing for their own deaths, marking them like appointments on a calendar. This is not a series of natural deaths or even a contagion. This is something far more sinister and organized. Through what remained of the convent community, shock waves were sent by the discovery of the hidden chamber. About the secret room, when Dr. Hartwell confronted Mother Superior Brennan, her response chilled him to the bone. Its existence she did not deny, or surprise at its discovery express. Instead, she smiled with the same peaceful expression that had been found on the faces of the dead sisters and said, "God's will cannot be hidden forever, Doctor. What must be will be." Now one of only 13 surviving sisters, Sister Mary Agnes found herself questioning everything she had believed about her religious community. In her records, she wrote, "I no longer recognize the women I have lived with for years. They speak of death as if it were a wedding they are preparing for, as if they have received invitations to a celebration that I have not been invited to attend. When I ask them to explain what is happening, they look at me with such pity that I feel like a child who cannot understand the simplest lesson." Impossibly harsh had the weather become, with temperatures dropping to 20 degrees below zero. So thickly were the convent's windows frosted over that it was impossible to see outside during the day, and at night the building creaked and groaned under the weight of ice and snow. In the kitchen around the large fireplace had the sisters been forced to gather, as it was the only room warm enough to occupy safely. But even in their cramped quarters, the remaining sisters continued their strange behavior. Constantly they prayed, but their prayers had taken on an urgent quality, as if they were calling to someone who was just beyond hearing. About the time drawing near and the final calling, they spoke in whispers. Most disturbing of all, they had begun to take turns sitting vigil by the window that faced the cemetery, watching for something that only they could see. Trapped at the convent by the weather, Dr. Hartwell found himself an unwilling witness to the disintegration of the community. That what he was observing was impossible, his medical training told him, but his eyes could not deny the evidence before them. By choice, the sisters were dying, but the mechanism of their deaths remained a mystery that defied all rational explanation. On the night of January 24th, as the wind howled around the building with such force that the walls seemed to shake, a discovery that would change everything was made by Sister Mary Agnes. Unable to sleep, she had been walking through the corridors of the convent when she heard voices coming from the chapel. Approaching quietly, she peered through the partially opened door and saw a sight that filled her with terror. Around the altar, the remaining sisters were gathered. But they were not alone. In the flickering candlelight, Agnes could see figures standing among them, figures that looked exactly like the sisters who had already died. With their living companions stood Sister Mary Catherine, Sister Mary Elizabeth, and Sister Mary Margaret, their faces glowing with an otherworldly light, their lips moving in silent prayer. I watched in horror as the dead sisters reached out to touch the living ones, Agnes wrote in her increasingly frantic handwriting. Where they touched, the living sisters' faces changed, becoming filled with the same peace and joy that I had seen on the faces of the dead. They were not ghosts or spirits. They were too solid, too real for that. They were something else entirely, something that my mind cannot accept or understand. As Agnes watched, paralyzed by fear and fascination, she saw Mother Superior Brennan step forward into the center of the circle. The dead sisters surrounded her, their hands reaching out to touch her face, her hands, her heart. With a joy that seemed almost painful to witness, the Mother Superior's expression changed, becoming radiant. Soon, Mother Superior Brennan whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. Soon we will all be together, all be free from the weight of this world. The calling has come, and we must answer. In unison, the living sisters nodded, their faces reflecting the same otherworldly peace that had claimed their departed companions. In voices that harmonized perfectly with sounds that seemed to come from beyond the physical realm, they began to pray. The candlelight flickered and danced, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. From the chapel, Sister Mary Agnes fled, her heart pounding with terror. To her cell she ran and barricaded the door, then spent the remainder of the night writing frantically in her record book, documenting everything she had seen. As she struggled to capture the impossible events she had witnessed, her handwriting became increasingly erratic. They are not dying, she wrote. They are being called, chosen, transformed into something that I cannot understand. The dead sisters are not gone. They are waiting, gathering their living companions to join them in whatever realm they have discovered. And I am left behind, alone with the knowledge that I am not chosen, not worthy of whatever blessing or curse has claimed them. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Sacred Heart intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this tale of death and devotion gone terribly wrong. The discovery that would reveal the true nature of what had been happening at Sacred Heart Convent was brought by the morning of January 25th. The lone witness to the previous night's impossible gathering, Sister Mary Agnes, found herself face to face with a truth that would shatter her understanding of reality itself. To find the convent completely silent, she awoke. No morning prayers, no movement in the corridors, no sounds from the kitchen. That she was now entirely alone among the living, she discovered when she emerged from her cell. During the night, the remaining 12 sisters had all died, found in their beds with the same peaceful expressions that had marked all the previous deaths. But this time there was something different. Not just her rosary, but a piece of paper bearing a single word was held in each sister's hands: complete. In a state of complete shock, Dr. Hartwell, who had been sleeping in the Mother Superior's office, awoke to find Sister Mary Agnes. The young woman was sitting in the chapel, surrounded by the empty pews, staring at the altar where she had witnessed the impossible gathering the night before. When the doctor approached her, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're waiting. All of them standing right there behind you, waiting for the final sister to join them." Behind him, Dr. Hartwell turned to look, but saw nothing except the empty chapel. When he turned back to Sister Mary Agnes, she was holding a piece of paper that had not been there moments before. On it was written a single word: soon. The most chilling account of what he discovered when he examined the final 12 bodies is provided by the doctor's medical journal from this day. Unlike the previous deaths, these sisters had not died alone. Simultaneously, at exactly the same moment, they had died, as if responding to a single irresistible call. Their expressions were not merely peaceful. They were ecstatic, as if they had experienced a joy so profound that their mortal bodies could not contain it. "What I have witnessed, I have no medical explanation for," Dr. Hartwell wrote. 13 healthy women have died without cause, without illness, without injury. They have simply chosen to depart this world, drawn by something that defies all rational explanation. The final 12 died at precisely the same moment, as if they were following a schedule that had been predetermined by forces beyond human understanding. But yet to come was the most disturbing discovery. When Dr. Hartwell and Sister Mary Agnes descended to the basement to examine the hidden chamber more closely, they found that the arrangement of crosses had changed. Lying flat on the altar were now the 12 crosses bearing the names of the newly dead sisters, joined by the cross bearing Mother Superior Brennan's name. Only one cross remained standing, the one bearing the name of Mary Agnes. With growing horror, Dr. Hartwell realized the ritual was not complete. They were waiting for the final sister to join them. The deaths were not random. They were carefully orchestrated, building toward a moment when the entire community would be united in whatever realm they had chosen to inhabit. Confronted with the evidence of her own predetermined fate, Sister Mary Agnes began to speak in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her own mind. "They call to me constantly now," she said. "Their voices are so beautiful, so full of peace and joy. They tell me that I am the last, the completion of their sacred circle. They say that once I join them, their work will be finished, their purpose fulfilled." By desperation and a growing sense that he was witnessing something that should not exist in the rational world, the doctor, driven, began to search frantically through the convent's records. In Mother Superior Brennan's private papers, he found a journal that revealed the truth behind the deaths, a truth so disturbing that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. A correspondence that had been taking place between Mother Superior Brennan and a mysterious figure known only as the Shepherd was detailed in the journal. The letters, written in a code that took Dr. Hartwell hours to decipher, revealed that the deaths at Sacred Heart were not spontaneous religious experiences, but the culmination of a carefully planned ritual that had been in preparation for months. That the Sisters of Sacred Heart had been chosen for a special purpose had been convinced by the Shepherd to Mother Superior Brennan, to serve as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The willing sacrifice of 13 sisters was required by the ritual, each dying at precisely the right moment to create a spiritual gateway that would allow the dead to return and gather their living companions. But as Dr. Hartwell delved deeper into the correspondence, he discovered something even more terrifying. Detailed instructions on how to prepare the sisters psychologically for their deaths were contained in the letters, using a combination of religious fervor, isolation, and carefully crafted suggestions that would make them believe they were receiving divine visions. The result of a systematic program of mental conditioning that had convinced them that death was a glorious transformation were the peaceful expressions on their faces, not of spiritual ecstasy. That the ritual was not unique to Sacred Heart was the most chilling revelation. With religious communities across the country, the Shepherd had been in correspondence, orchestrating similar events wherever he could find leaders willing to believe in his divine mission. Just one part of a much larger plan that had been unfolding for years were the deaths at Sacred Heart. As Dr. Hartwell read through page after page of detailed instructions on psychological manipulation and religious conditioning, he began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Not of supernatural forces had the sisters been victims. They had been victims of a calculated campaign of mental abuse disguised as spiritual guidance. Their faith, their isolation, and their trust in their Mother Superior had been weaponized against them by someone who understood exactly how to exploit religious devotion for his own twisted purposes. Could have been prevented, the entire tragedy, Dr. Hartwell wrote in his journal. These women died not because of divine calling or supernatural intervention, but because they were systematically conditioned to believe that their deaths would serve a holy purpose. They were murdered not with poison or violence, but with lies carefully crafted to appeal to their deepest spiritual longings. As he read the final letters in the correspondence, the doctor's hands trembled. To visit Sacred Heart in the spring to witness the completion of his experiment had been planned by the shepherd. Not as human beings with inherent worth and dignity had he viewed the sisters, but as test subjects in a grand design to prove his theories about the power of faith to overcome the natural human instinct for self-preservation. A methodology he was creating, Doctor realized with growing horror, a systematic approach to convincing religious communities to commit mass suicide while believing they were serving God. Not his first victims were the Sisters of Sacred Heart, and not his last were they intended to be. The ultimate truth behind the deaths at Sacred Heart Convent is revealed by the final entry in Sister Mary Agnes' record book, written in a hand that trembled with either fear or anticipation. As Dr. Hartwell worked frantically to decode the Mother Superior's correspondence, Agnes sat alone in the chapel, surrounded by the presence of her departed sisters. "They are all here with me now," she wrote. "I can see them as clearly as I could see them in life, perhaps more clearly. They stand in a circle around me, their faces glowing with a light that comes from within, their voices joining in a harmony that makes my heart ache with longing. They tell me that the door between worlds is almost open, that one more willing soul is needed to complete the bridge they have built with their deaths." Having finally deciphered the complete correspondence, Dr. Hartwell realized that the shepherd was not a religious figure at all, but a man named Marcus Aldrich, a former seminary student who had been expelled from theological school for his heretical beliefs about death and resurrection. About the idea that death was not an ending but a transformation had Aldrich become obsessed, and that properly prepared souls could return to guide others across the threshold between life and death. Of the horrific truth, his growing understanding is recorded in the doctor's journal. Experiments in what he calls spiritual engineering has Aldrich been using the isolation and devotion of religious communities to conduct. He identifies communities that are particularly devout and isolated, then uses their faith against them, convincing them that they have been chosen for a special purpose. Not suicides in the traditional sense are the deaths. They are acts of faith performed by people who genuinely believe they are serving a divine purpose. But something even more disturbing about Aldrich's methods was revealed by Dr. Hartwell's investigation. The man had not simply convinced the sisters to die. He had created an elaborate psychological conditioning program that made them want to die. Through a careful combination of religious imagery, social isolation, and repeated suggestions, he had convinced them that their earthly lives were obstacles to a greater spiritual existence. How Aldrich had instructed Mother Superior Brennan to gradually introduce ideas about the chosen ones who would be called to serve God in a special way was shown by the letters. Specific prayers and meditations designed to make the sisters more susceptible to suggestion had been provided by him, and he had given her detailed instructions on how to interpret any unusual events as signs of divine favor. Most insidiously, Aldrich had taught the Mother Superior to use the sisters' love for each other as a weapon against them. Not as a tragedy, but as a blessing that the remaining sisters should envy was each death presented. As proof that they had found something wonderful beyond life were the peaceful expressions on the faces of the dead used, making the living sisters eager to follow them. The instrument of their destruction, he turned their greatest strength, their love for God and each other, into, Dr. Hartwell wrote. These women died believing they were being obedient to divine will, when in fact they were being obedient to the twisted fantasies of a madman who saw their faith as something to be exploited rather than respected. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Dr. Hartwell realized that he had to act quickly to save Sister Mary Agnes from the fate that had claimed her companions. But when he returned to the chapel to warn her, he found her kneeling before the altar, her arms outstretched as if embracing invisible figures. "Doctor," she said without turning around. "They have shown me such beautiful things. They have shown me the place where pain ends and joy begins, where the weight of this world falls away like old clothes. How can I turn away from such a gift?" What he had discovered, Dr. Hartwell tried to explain, tried to convince her that the deaths were not divine callings, but the result of psychological manipulation by a disturbed individual. From Aldrich's letters, he read to her, showing her the detailed instructions for conditioning religious communities to accept death as a blessing. How her visions and the peaceful expressions of her dead sisters were not supernatural phenomena, but the predictable results of a carefully orchestrated campaign of mental manipulation, he explained. But with the same peaceful expression that had marked all the previous deaths, Sister Mary Agnes only smiled. "You see only the surface of things," she said. "You see death where there is transformation. You see loss where there is gain. My sisters are not gone. They are more alive than they have ever been, and soon I will join them in that greater life." By desperation, Dr. Hartwell, driven, attempted to physically remove Sister Mary Agnes from the chapel. But as he reached for her, she spoke a single word, "Now." Limp went the young nun's body and she collapsed into Dr. Hartwell's arms. Of profound peace was her expression, her lips curved in a gentle smile. Like all the sisters who had died before her, she showed no signs of illness or injury. She had simply chosen to stop living, drawn by a call that only she could hear, a call that had been carefully programmed into her mind by someone who understood exactly how to exploit religious faith for his own purposes. Now the sole survivor of the tragedy at Sacred Heart Convent, Dr. Hartwell spent the next 3 days alone in the building, caring for the bodies of 14 women who had died for reasons that were both perfectly explainable and completely horrifying. When the weather finally cleared enough for him to make the journey back to Millbrook, he was a changed man who carried with him the terrible knowledge of how easily faith could be corrupted by those who sought to exploit it. A masterpiece of medical discretion was his final report to the county authorities. To a previously unknown contagion that had been contained by the isolation of the convent, he attributed the deaths. In a mass grave in the cemetery behind Sacred Heart, the bodies were buried, and by order of the Catholic Church, the building was sealed. But a different story entirely is told by Dr. Hartwell's private journals, discovered after his death in 1867. In them, he documents not just the events at Sacred Heart, but his subsequent investigation into similar occurrences at religious communities across the country. A pattern of tragedies that stretched back nearly a decade was what he found, all connected by the same mysterious correspondence with the shepherd. A convent in Virginia where 8 nuns died in their sleep, all found with peaceful expressions and notes reading "Called Home." A monastery in Pennsylvania where 12 monks were found dead in their chapel after what the surviving brother described as a night of divine visitation. A Baptist mission in Tennessee where an entire congregation of 23 people passed away during a prayer meeting, their faces showing the same inexplicable joy that had marked the Sisters of Sacred Heart. To various natural causes had all of these deaths been attributed: disease, accidents, acts of God. Lacking the medical knowledge to explain the phenomena, local authorities had accepted the explanations provided by surviving religious leaders or visiting physicians. But the common thread that connected them all was revealed by Dr. Hartwell's research, correspondence with Marcus Aldrich, the self-styled shepherd who had perfected the art of turning faith into a weapon of mass destruction. To some of Aldrich's early writings led Dr. Hartwell's investigation, published in obscure theological journals under various pseudonyms. In these papers, Aldrich outlined his theories about the spiritual engineering of religious communities, arguing that true faith required the complete surrender of earthly attachment, including attachment to life itself. That properly guided religious communities could achieve a state of collective transcendence that would serve as an example to the wider world, he believed. A prophet of a new form of religious expression, Aldrich saw himself as, Dr. Hartwell wrote. He believed that he was helping these communities achieve their ultimate spiritual potential, even as he was systematically destroying them. In his mind, the deaths were not tragedies but triumphs, proof that his methods could overcome the most basic human instinct for survival. That Aldrich had not worked alone was also revealed by the doctor's research. A network of followers who helped him identify suitable communities and provided him with detailed information about their religious practices, leadership structures, and vulnerabilities he had developed. These accomplices, often former seminary students or disillusioned clergy members, would infiltrate communities months or even years before Aldrich made contact, gradually preparing the ground for his psychological manipulation. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Hartwell discovered that the events at Sacred Heart were not the end of Aldrich's campaign, but merely one experiment in a much larger program. That Aldrich had been working on refining his methods was found by the Doctor, developing more efficient ways to condition entire communities for mass death while maintaining the appearance